I always thought I could take that secret to my gravier burden so heavy, so deep, that hiding it seemed easier than facing it. I knew the reason behind my 3 children's disabilities, something no one else knew, not even my husband. But no matter how much I tried to deceive myself, the truth always has a way of coming out. And when it finally surfaced, the pain wasn't mine alone. It rippled through everyone around me, shaking the very foundation of my family. It was as if the world stopped in that moment. My husband's bewildered look, the pain in my children's eyes. Everything was changing before me, and I knew that the truth, however liberating it might be, would come at a far greater cost than I had imagined. I thought I could protect everyone, but in the end, the secret I kept to preserve some semblance of normalcy ended up destroying what I loved the most. At that moment, when I thought I had everything under control, I was forced to reveal the truth. But the weight of that revelation was far more than I could bear. The pain I felt wasn't just from confessing what I knew. It was the agony of realizing that in trying to protect others, I had hurt the very people I wanted to shield the most. Being a mother for the first time is an indescribable experience. When I held my first child in my arms, I felt my life take on a greater purpose. He was small, fragile, but perfect in my eyes. Every smile, every little movement was like a ray of light illuminating my world. I wanted to protect him from everything, to give him the best life had to offer. But as the months went by, I noticed something was different. While other mothers talked about their babies crawling or babbling, my son seemed a little behind. At first I thought maybe it was just his pace. Every child has their own timing, right? Still, doubts began to pile up. Little things, like the way he looked at me, or his lack of response to simple stimuli, unsettled my heart. I sought comfort in conversations with other moms, but deep down, something told me this wasn't just a slower development. Even so, I kept these worries to myself. I didn't want to worry my husband, who was so thrilled with fatherhood. He saw our son as a blessing, proof that our family was becoming everything we'd always dreamed of. I didn't have the courage to say that something was bothering me, and so began my journey of silent doubts. I loved my son more than anything, but the fear that something was wrong hovered over me like a shadow that I didn't know would grow even darker as the years went by. When I found out I was pregnant with our second child, a mix of emotions overwhelmed me. On one hand, I was overjoyed at expanding our family. I imagined my 2 children growing up together, inseparable companions, sharing laughter and adventures. On the other hand, a quiet fear lingered. My first son's development was still an enigma. Though he was a charming, spirited child, it was clear he faced challenges other kids his age didn't. The medical appointments and tests we'd done so far hadn't provided any definitive answers, but I knew something was there, something I feared could happen again. When my second child was born, hope blossomed anew. He was healthy, and everything seemed to be going well. But as he grew, subtle signs began to emerge once more. Like a movie I'd seen before, the same doubts crept back in. Developmental delays, behaviors that didn't align with expectations. I began to notice a pattern. This time, the impact was greater. It wasn't just about every child develops at their own pace. I felt there was something deeper, something connecting the 2 of them. But how could I admit this, even to myself? My husband, once again, seemed oblivious. He was a loving, dedicated father, but perhaps out of fear or a lack of awareness, he never voiced the same concerns I had. That left me alone with my thoughts, alone with the burden of searching for answers without knowing where to look. So the doubt grew stronger, but I still clung to hope. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just an anxious mom. But the fear of being right kept me from sharing what I really felt. I looked at my 2 sons and knew that somehow it was all connected. I just didn't know how deeply. When I discovered I was pregnant for the 3rd time, the news took me by surprise. It wasn't something we had planned, but as always, I chose to embrace the moment with joy. Despite all the uncertainties, I believed our family could handle another child. But something inside me felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that this pregnancy would bring answers to questions I had avoided asking. Would the same challenges arise? Or would everything be completely different? When he was born, I felt that rush of love only a mother knows. He seemed perfect, as all babies are. But over time, the familiar signs began to appear again. It was like a cruel déjà vu. The same delays, the same difficulties, the same distant looks, as if part of him was somewhere else. Now, there was no denying it. Something was wrong, and it wasn't a coincidence. 3 children, 3 stories, all with the same struggles. It was then that the weight of the secret I carried became almost unbearable. I knew that somewhere within me lay the answer. My heart ached as I thought about the choices I'd made in the past, the truths I'd hidden, and the consequences they might have brought upon my family. My husband still suspected nothing. He was optimistic by nature, convinced that everything would resolve itself with love, patience, and time. But I knew it wasn't that simple. This time, I couldn't ignore the signs. Something bigger was about to happen, and I felt my life would never be the same. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, with my heart heavy from the secret I carried. It was like a giant stone crushing my chest, slowly suffocating me. When I looked at my children, my love for them was overwhelming. But guilt crept in like a shadow, reminding me that I knew something no one else did. Something I even hid from myself, because saying it out loud would open a wound that might never heal. It wasn't just the fear of how my husband would react if he found out. It ran deeper. It was the fear of facing who I really was, of confronting what I had done or failed to do and how it might be tied to my children's struggles. I tried to convince myself that silence was the best choice. Why cause more pain? I told myself. My family was united. My children were happy despite their challenges, and my husband was a loving father. I had everything to lose. But the weight was unbearable. Each time I lied by omission, I felt I was betraying the trust of the man who shared his life with me. He believed in me, trusted my decisions as a mother and partner. Yet I knew that if he found out the truth, it could destroy everything we had built together. At the same time, keeping the secret meant bearing the entire responsibility alone. There was no one I could confide in, no one to share the burden with. It consumed me from the inside out. It was like living in an emotional prison, with the key to freedom in my own hands, but using it would mean risking everything. I watched my children playing together and wondered, was I protecting them or hurting them, even more by staying silent? That question haunted me every single day. I knew that, eventually, I would have to face the truth, but I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. My husband has always been the pillar of our family. He had this calmness about him that I deeply admired. While I was drowning in silent worries, he seemed to glide through life with a lightness that sometimes drove me crazy. How could he not see the same signs I did? Did he truly not notice, or did he just prefer to look the other way? Our relationship was built on trust and partnership, but the secret I carried created an invisible wall between us. I would smile and agree outwardly, but inside, I felt like a fraud. He believed I was being completely honest, while I was hiding a crucial piece of the truth. There were moments when he would talk about the kids' futures with so much optimism that it broke my heart. He dreamed big, made grand plans, and instead of sharing in those dreams, I'd just nod, knowing the reality was far more complicated than he imagined. He never pushed me when I seemed worried. He'd ask if I was okay, if I needed anything, but he always accepted the vague answers I gave him. Maybe it was because he trusted that if something was really wrong, I'd tell him, and that only made the weight of my silence even more unbearable. Sometimes I wanted to tell him everything, to open my heart, confess what was tormenting me, and ask for help. But fear held me back. Fear that he wouldn't understand. Fear that he might judge me. fear that the love he had for me wouldn't be enough to withstand the truth. Even so, there were tiny moments when I felt a spark of hope. Maybe he was stronger than I gave him credit for. Maybe our relationship could survive this. But the fear was still bigger than my courage, and so, once again, I chose silence. While my husband was immersed in the daily grind and dreaming about our family's future, I embarked on a solitary quest for answers. Without him knowing, I started consulting doctors, specialists, and even online support groups, desperate to find an explanation for our children's struggles. I devoured every piece of information I could find about child development and genetic disorders. Every article, every story from other mothers, felt like it added a piece to the puzzle I was trying to solve alone. But the more I searched, the more the pieces seemed to point toward a place I was terrified to face. I made sure to take our children to regular medical checkups, presenting myself as nothing more than a diligent mom. During these appointments, I listened intently to the doctors, yet I never dared to ask the one question that haunted me. Could this be related to something I did in the past? I just couldn't. The guilt sealed my lips. Once, during a consultation with a neurologist, he mentioned the possibility of genetic or environmental factors being linked to our children's difficulties. My heart raced. It felt as though he had unknowingly struck the very nerve of the secret I carried. Instead of speaking up, I simply nodded and thanked him for the information. I left the office feeling as though I was walking around with a bomb ready to detonate. In online support groups, I lurked quietly, reading through the discussions without contributing. I found solace in the stories of other mothers facing similar challenges, and for a brief moment, I felt less alone. Yet, fear held me back from sharing my story. What if something I said could somehow trace back to me? I was trapped in a relentless cycle of searching for answers and maintaining silence. I craved clarity but feared what it might reveal. I wanted help, but couldn't bring myself to ask. Meanwhile, the weight of my secret grew heavier, pressing down with the certainty that I couldn't avoid the truth forever. Deep down, I always knew that the secret I carried wasn't just an emotional burden, it was a ticking time bomb. There was something in my past that I'd never had the courage to face head-on, but now, as I looked into the eyes of my 3 children, it became impossible to ignore. Before I married, I went through a period of reckless decisions. In the middle of a toxic, tumultuous relationship, I was exposed to something that left a permanent mark on my life. I had unknowingly participated in an illegal medical experiment. Convinced it was harmless, a study allegedly aimed at revolutionizing treatments, I was paid well at a time when I desperately needed the money. What they didn't tell me was that the experimental substances were dangerous, capable of altering DNA and potentially causing genetic mutations in future generations. I was young, naive, and too trusting of people who saw me as nothing more than a test subject. When it ended, I vowed to bury that chapter of my life, never to open it again. But the past has a way of resurfacing, and it struck back cruelly. Each challenge my children faced was a living reminder of the mistake I thought I had left behind. Their struggles were the haunting legacy of a choice I had made years ago, one I now faced every single day. The guilt consumed me. I wasn't just a mother trying to understand her children's challenges, I was the cause. And worst of all, I never told my husband. He, who adored our children unconditionally, believed their difficulties were a random act of nature. Could he ever forgive me if he knew the truth stemmed from a choice I made long ago? The truth felt like it would shatter everything. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was the knowledge that my silence had built a wall between us. Yet the fear of tearing our family apart kept me frozen. How does one confess to a mistake so massive, knowing the price of honesty could outweigh the cost of silence? Eventually, the weight of the secret became unbearable. But even then, something within me resisted. How could I bring myself to share something so devastating with my husband? How could I reveal the truth without destroying everything we had built together? Every day, I asked myself if he could understand. He had always been loving and unwaveringly trusting. But would that be enough to withstand such a dark revelation? Would he ever see our family the same way again? Or would he see me differently? unable to reconcile the woman he loved with the choices I had made. My children's innocent eyes would often meet mine with a silent intensity. I knew they needed more than I was giving them. They needed a mother who could protect them not just with love, but with truth. Yet the truth felt like an abyss I was terrified to step into. What tormented me most was the guilt. Every glance at my children seemed to carry an unspoken question. Why did you keep this from us? Even though their innocence shielded them from the full gravity of the situation, they could feel the tension in the air, the hesitation in my words, the weight in my movements. So why couldn't I speak up? What held me back from finally breaking my silence? It was fear. Of course, fear of the suffering the truth would bring to all of us. Fear that the pain, once unleashed, would be more than we could bear. Yet I also knew that keeping it hidden was like harboring poison, something that ate away at me more each day. The truth never stays buried forever. Deep down, I knew I would eventually have to confront it. But at that moment, I still wasn't ready. One ordinary afternoon, during what seemed like a moment of calm, my world began to crumble. We were all in the living room, my husband, our kids, and me. They were laughing and playing, but I couldn't focus. The secret I had kept hidden for so long was threatening to come to light. I didn't know when or how, but I felt it looming. The revelation came from an unexpected place. During a routine medical consultation, one of the specialists asked a simple question that caught me off guard. He inquired, almost casually, about my health prior to pregnancy, whether I had been exposed to any risks or undergone anything that might have influenced my children's development. I froze. The question seemed innocent, yet it struck with pinpoint accuracy. Time felt like it stopped as the weight of my secret pressed down on me with unbearable force. At that moment, something within me broke a voice I could no longer suppress. Everything I had hidden, all my lies, were on the verge of being exposed, not by me but by someone else. In that doctor's office, as I searched for the words to explain the inexplicable, I realized I couldn't keep running from the truth. With tears in my eyes, I made the decision to tell him everything. The confession was terrifying and painful, but also brought an unexpected relief. For the first time, I felt the chains of my secret begin to loosen. The doctor looked at me with understanding and said something I'll never forget. "You're not alone, and this doesn't define you as a mother." Those words, in that moment, gave me the strength to face what lay ahead. I knew that revealing the truth to everyone would be a difficult road, but I could no longer live under the crushing weight of my silence. When I finally told my husband, the room fell into a suffocating silence. The truth lingered in the air like a dark cloud. He didn't react immediately. I saw him freeze, stunned, as he tried to process what I had just confessed. The words I had dreaded saying were now out in the open, but they seemed to echo endlessly, unable to settle between us. He looked at me as if trying to understand, but the words seemed to have vanished from his mouth. There was no anger, no judgment, but there was a deep pain in his eyes. A pain that cut through me like a knife. He, who had always trusted me, who always believed I had everything under control, was now faced with a truth he could never have imagined. I expected an outburst, a reaction of rage, but what happened was far harder to handle. He stayed silent. Yes, he was hurt, but the silence he imposed between us was more painful than any scream could ever be. I knew he needed time, but the weight of that time was unbearable. What hurt the most was knowing that I had pushed him away with my secret. My husband, who had always been my partner, my rock. And now, that truth I had hidden out of fear was driving a wedge between us. He wasn't just processing what I had told him. He was also trying to make sense of how he felt about me. How could he look at me the same way after this? How could he ever trust me again? The days that followed were the hardest of our relationship. I tried to reach out, but he remained distant, lost in his thoughts. I felt his eyes on me, but I could tell he didn't see me the same way. The love we shared seemed overshadowed by an invisible weight tone that I had placed upon us. I tried to apologize, to explain, but I knew words couldn't fix what I had done. I had put him in an impossible situation. He wasn't just dealing with the pain of a lie. but with the crushing reality that our family was being torn apart by something I had caused a reckless choice from my past. And in the midst of it all, I wondered, had I done something irreparable? Could we ever go back to being the way we were? I didn't know, but I knew our future would have to be built on this pain, not on a lie I could no longer carry. What followed the revelation was a gradual separation, not physical, but emotional. We lived under the same roof, yet the distance between us grew with each passing day. I could see the pain in his eyes, but also the silence. The same silence I had carried for so long was now his burden. I desperately wanted to undo the damage, to make him see that we were still the same family, that he and our children meant the world to me. But with every attempt I made to get closer, he pulled further away. It wasn't rejection, it was a painful distance, as if he needed time to process what had happened, and more importantly, what this new version of me meant. I understood what he was feeling, more than I wanted to admit. He was grappling with the loss of trust, with the realization that the woman he had married and built a family with had been hiding something so profound and life-altering. What hurt me most was knowing that, even after so many years together, I had placed him in a position where he didn't know how to see me anymore. How could anyone look at their partner with the same trust after such a devastating truth? He didn't blame me outright, but I saw the sadness in his eyes, the questioning in his words, and perhaps the worst part was that he started blaming himself too. He wondered if he should have noticed something, if there was something he could have done to stop me from keeping that secret. Watching him go through that self-doubt was unbearable. I knew he didn't deserve any of this. Meanwhile, the kids, in their innocence, could feel the tension too. I tried to stay strong for them, but even the youngest could sense that something was off. Their laughter no longer carried the same lightness. The house was weighed down by an uncomfortable silence. I was the cause of that change, and it tore me apart inside. I knew I had to give him space, but every moment apart felt like a step further away from what we used to be. How do you rebuild trust after something like this? How do you erase the pain you caused? I felt like we were slowly drifting from something that could never fully be repaired, and that was the hardest part to accept. As I sank deeper into the pain of what was happening between my husband and me, something even more heartbreaking consumed me: the impact on my children. They were the purest part of my life, and yet they were being affected in ways I couldn't control. The innocence that once sparkled in their eyes seemed to fade, little by little, every day. Even though they didn't know exactly what was happening between their dad and me, they could sense the change in the air. The heavy silence, the whispered conversations we tried to have when we thought they weren't listening. I saw the quiet confusion in their eyes, as if they knew something was wrong but couldn't quite figure out what. It was like the home that once felt safe and warm had turned into a place filled with tension and uncertainty. I tried to protect them, of course. I tried to give them the love and attention they needed, but I couldn't hide the pain that was consuming me. They started asking questions I couldn't answer. Why is Dad so sad? Or, Mom, what's going on with you? Those questions cut me deeply because I didn't know what to say. How could I explain what was happening without hurting them even more? How could I talk about something so complex and painful without shattering the image they had of our family? My guilt multiplied every day because, despite trying to be strong, I knew I was hurting them. They were growing up in an environment that was once full of love and joy, but was now being corroded by guilt, fear, and pain. I could see them losing their lightness, losing that sparkle in their eyes that's so characteristic of children when they feel safe. Once again, the harsh reality of what I had done hit me. My children were innocent, yet they were paying the price for a thoughtless decision I made years ago. At the same time, something deep inside me told me that the truth, as painful as it was the only way to give them a chance at healing and reconciliation. They deserved to know, but the idea of placing that burden on them was crushing. How could a mother carry the weight of knowing her children would suffer? I knew that, eventually, they would have to understand what had happened, but I wasn't ready to face that reality with them just yet. Then came the moment when I realized I couldn't delay any longer. The silence was affecting all of us, and my children, with their sensitivity, were becoming increasingly troubled, even without fully knowing what was going on. I felt it was my responsibility to give them, somehow, the truth I had been hiding. But the thought of explaining what I had done, of revealing the source of the struggles we were facing, terrified me. How could I tell them something so devastating without tearing apart what little was left of our family? The decision to tell them wasn't easy. I knew their understanding would be limited, that children, in their innocence, wouldn't be able to grasp the full weight of the truth. But at the same time, I realized that if I didn't involve them in this process of healing, we would all be trapped in a cycle of silence and resentment. They needed to know that the difficulties we faced weren't a punishment, and that none of it was their fault. Even so, the fear of hurting them paralyzed me. It was on a Saturday afternoon, as we tried to return to some sense of normalcy, that I found the courage to speak. We were all together in the living room, the air still heavy with tension, but filled with a desire to change something, to take the first step toward forgiveness and healing. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice trembling. They looked at me with curiosity, not knowing what to expect. I knew this would change our lives forever, but there was no turning back. I explained, in the simplest and most honest way I could, that the challenges they were facing stemmed from something far deeper than just a health issue. I spoke about my choices, about a mistake from my past that had directly impacted their lives. I couldn't stop myself from crying as I said those words, and I saw them sitting there in silence, trying to make sense of it all. It was painful, excruciating, to see the confusion in their eyes. But at the same time, something remarkable began to happen. Despite everything, the openness of the conversation brought us closer. I realized that, despite the pain, my children were absorbing the information with a maturity that surprised me. Even if their understanding was incomplete, they weren't as hurt as I had feared. Instead, they seemed more concerned about us as a family than about the mistake I had made. In that moment, I knew I was doing the right thing. The truth, as hard and painful as it was the first step toward reconciliation. By sharing it with my children, I was beginning to rebuild trust and give them the chance to understand and grow with this new reality. There were no more secrets between us. After telling my children, part of me felt relieved, but another part remained overwhelmed by the pain of what we still had to face. The truth was out, but now we had to deal with the consequences. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that. The road ahead was filled with challenges, and the fear that our lives would never be the same consumed me. Yet, there was a sense that we were finally starting to heal the wounds I had caused. In the days that followed, my husband and I tried to communicate more openly, attempting to figure out how to move forward. At first, the sense of strangeness and distance between us was still there. He couldn't stop thinking about what I had done, but he also began wondering how we could overcome it together. For him, trust had been broken, but he wasn't ready to give up on our family. Still, there was a void that seemed impossible to fill. Even with efforts to restore communication, our relationship felt shattered. We tried to reconnect, but I knew that rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight. What I feared most was that, over time, the emotional scars we carried would become permanent. As for my children, even with their limited understanding, there was a need to restore normalcy. Every day was an attempt to rebuild what I knew was essential for our family to survive this storm: love and mutual support. I wanted to be the mother they deserved, but I also knew we needed time to learn how to cope with what we had endured. We started family therapy, looking for ways to reconnect. It was a constant struggle against fear, insecurity, and guilt. But something told me that if we stayed united, we could emerge stronger from this. I understood that the process would be long, that things wouldn't always be easy, but I also realized that the honesty we now shared, despite its pain, was giving us a foundation stronger than any lie could ever provide. It was about taking one step at a time, Even in moments of despair, we tried to remind ourselves that rebuilding was a tough but achievable journey. When I looked at my children, I focused on the strength they were showing as they faced such a difficult reality for one so young. And when I looked at my husband, I saw that he was still there, willing to try, to move forward, even with the weight of distrust. Now, more than ever, I know the real work has just begun. Healing our family won't happen just with time, but through daily efforts, understanding, forgiveness, and most importantly, love. Each day, we try to piece back together what had fallen apart, trusting that love can be stronger than pain. Looking back, I see that the price of the truth was much higher than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just the pain of seeing how my actions impacted my children's and husband's lives. The real cost was emotional and psychological, a constant battle between the mistake I made and the steps I needed to take to make things right. The price of the truth wasn't just the pain of the moment, but the lasting reminder that some choices, once made, can alter everyone's lives forever. I've learned, painfully, that keeping secrets is a silent poison that slowly eats away at everything around you. The lie I carried didn't just distance me from my family, it distanced me from myself. Each day that I kept that secret, I moved further away from who I truly was, from who I wanted to be. When the truth finally came out, something inside me broke, but something else was renewed. The pain of seeing my husband and children suffer, the disappointment in their eyes, made me understand that even with the best intentions in hiding that secret, lies are never the answer. While the weight of the revelation was overwhelming, it also allowed me to live more transparently. There is no real peace while carrying such a heavy lie. I also learned that forgiveness is a process, not a destination. It isn't something that can be given instantly. My husband and children needed time to process the pain I had caused. I wanted everything to be resolved quickly, for things to go back to normal. But forgiveness doesn't work that way. It needs space, patience, and, most importantly, actions that demonstrate genuine remorse and change. The truth, though painful, also opened the door to a new way of living. The path we're on now is different, but it's real. It's marked by scars, yes, but also by a renewed commitment to healing and reconciliation. I know we'll never be the same, and there's no erasing what happened. But at the same time, I see that our ability to love and rebuild has grown. The final lesson I've learned is that when we're honest, no matter how painful it is, true freedom begins to emerge. Lies can keep us imprisoned, but the truth, even when it hurts, allows us to grow, learn, and eventually forgive. The price of the truth was high, but it brought with it a chance for a fresh start, a chance that, in some ways, made it all worth it. If you're dealing with a secret, a hidden pain, or something that's eating away at your peace, know that the truth, as hard as it may seem, is the first step toward freedom. Don't let the fear of its impact keep you from living authentically. Healing only begins when you decide to be honest with yourself and others, no matter how terrifying that feels. If you've gone through something similar, or are facing an internal struggle, share your story in the comments. Your experience might be what someone else needs to find the courage to take their first step. We're not alone on this journey, and together, we can turn pain into learning. If you appreciated this account, don't forget to subscribe for more stories and reflections like this. The journey to healing is long, but it starts now.